that spa next door wasn't a spa at all, but the front line of a global trafficking war. Yes, what if beneath the hum of massage tables and scented candles, women were trapped in a system as organized and ruthless as any drug cartel? That nightmare became reality this week when federal agents stormed dozens of wellness centers across the United States under Operation Coast to Coast, a campaign that stunned even veteran investigators. In scenes unfolding from Texas to New York, FBI, ICE, and Homeland Security teams moved in before dawn. Behind shuttered blinds, they found victims locked in rooms the size of closets, their passports confiscated, their lives reduced to ledgers and coded texts. The raids mark one of the largest anti-trafficking operations in recent U.S. history. Federal officials confirmed that more than 30 people were arrested, while over 60 victims were rescued from forced labor and sexual exploitation. But beyond the arrests lies something far darker, a criminal structure that mirrors the precision of military logistics. Evidence now shows that this network was not confined to one city or coast. It was national, connecting suburban storefronts, strip malls, and residential neighborhoods in a web of exploitation stretching across 5 states. According to new findings from Reuters and BBC News agents, traced financial activity and encrypted communications linking these U.S. operations to Chinese triads operating from Macau and Hong Kong. Each parlor was a node in a machine that rotated victims across state lines every few months, making detection nearly impossible. The traffickers used legitimate business fronts, fake wellness licenses, and shell companies to hide profits and operation, described by Homeland Security as industrialized human exploitation. President Donald Trump's administration has reportedly elevated human trafficking investigations to national security priority status, equating them with terrorism and narco crime. The move reflects growing recognition that transnational trafficking undermines American sovereignty, fuels corruption, and strengthens foreign criminal syndicates. Senior DHS analysts told The Guardian that this case exposes how covert foreign networks exploit legal loopholes to operate on U.S. soil under the cover of commerce. Strategically, the operation signals a shift in Washington's law enforcement doctrine, one increasingly modeled on counterterrorism coordination. Much like the drone-enabled surveillance used in counterinsurgency campaigns abroad, analysts say the same intelligence fusion now drives domestic security operations. The U.S. is adapting, treating organized trafficking as a hybrid threat that fuses crime migration and cyber finance. The pattern echoes global power struggles, from human smuggling across the Ukrainian front lines to Iranian-backed networks in Syria, or even cyber-enabled trade manipulation between the US and China. Each reflects the same question: how much freedom is the world willing to sacrifice in the name of security? On the ground, the human toll was harrowing. Inside those raided parlors, women lived under constant watch, some sleeping behind curtains, others confined to storage rooms lined with soundproof foam. Their freedom was traded for obedience, their fear weaponized through lies that US police would never protect them. For years, they remained invisible, hidden in plain sight. The dawn raids shattered that illusion. Federal teams moving with precision, honed by months of surveillance, breached multiple businesses simultaneously to prevent any escape or evidence destruction. One officer later described it as a synchronized strike across the body of America's underworld. The deeper implication goes beyond borders or arrests. It forces a reckoning with the moral architecture of modern freedom. Can a nation truly call itself free if such networks thrive within its own neighborhoods? As America confronts the shadow economy that trades in human lives, one question now echoes from Washington to Beijing: how do you fight slavery without becoming what you fear, a surveillance state that sees everything but saves no one? It began with a promise, a job, a visa, a new start in America. For hundreds of women from small towns in China's Fujian and Guangdong provinces, that promise became a prison. Investigators found that what appeared to be wellness centers in suburban malls were in fact parts of a vast network of coercion, fear, and profit. Victims were lured through online job postings in Mandarin, promising legal employment and housing. But once they arrived, their passports were seized, their movements monitored, and their debts fabricated. Behind pastel-colored signs and dim lights, the walls hid an industry running on human despair. Federal agents described these massage parlors as nodes of control. They were designed to look ordinary, but operated with the precision of a cartel. According to DW and The Guardian, digital evidence seized from encrypted phones revealed coordinated scheduling, coded financial records, and even internal disciplinary systems. Women were rotated every few weeks from one location to another, a tactic meant to keep them disoriented and dependent. The methods, say investigators, mirror strategies once used by Eastern European trafficking rings during the Balkan Wars. hackers, and more recently by armed militias in Ukraine who use similar techniques to control movement and suppress dissent. At the center of this criminal structure stood what analysts now call a shadow syndicate, a network of brokers, accountants, and handlers operating both in the US and in mainland China. Reuters confirmed that some of the seized funds were funneled through Hong Kong registered shell firms under the guise of real estate or consulting payments. The sophistication shocked even veteran financial crime experts. They operate like a multinational corporation, one senior Homeland Security investigator told BBC News. Except their commodity is human life. President Trump's administration responded by invoking the Homeland Integrity Reform Directive, an executive framework expanding federal power to pursue cross-border criminal enterprises linked to hostile foreign entities. The directive mirrors some of the same legislative architecture used against cyber espionage groups and narcotics traffickers. Officials within ICE and the FBI described this as the new frontier of hybrid warfare 1, where traffickers exploit open economies the same way adversarial nations exploit open networks. The political resonance extends far beyond American borders. In recent months, global trafficking patterns have intersected with larger geopolitical flashpoints, displaced women from the Ukraine front line sold into Western Europe, Iranian proxy routes facilitating human transport across the Gulf, Chinese syndicates exploiting labor migration corridors through Latin America. In each case, exploitation becomes both a weapon and a business model, an invisible economy that thrives in chaos and feeds off globalization's blind spots. But beneath these layers of geopolitics lies a simpler truth control. The women trapped inside these US parlors were not just workers, they were hostages in a commercial war for profit. One survivor, identified by Al Jazeera as May, told investigators she was told to smile or lose food. Her story echoes countless others who believed they were coming to the land of freedom only to find themselves behind locked doors. The American public is now wrestling with a painful paradox. The same open society that promises opportunity can also conceal exploitation. Analysts at The Guardian argue that this case forces a moral question about transparency and national security. Can liberty coexist with invisible systems that prey on it? Strategically, the case underscores how trafficking has become a form of asymmetric power projection. By embedding themselves in legitimate economies, foreign syndicates erode the integrity of Western markets while bypassing state surveillance. It's the same pattern the Pentagon has tracked in gray zone warfare, the blend of criminal and political operations that blur lines between combat and commerce. As the victims are processed through rehabilitation programs and federal prosecutors prepare the first wave of indictments, America faces a defining test. Will the nation that once declared war on slavery now confront the modern version operating within its own borders? Or will comfort and denial allow the shadows to return once the headlines fade? Money was the bloodstream of the entire network, silent, invisible, and constantly moving. What investigators uncovered during Operation Coast to Coast was not just a chain of illegal businesses, but a financial ecosystem designed to conceal slavery behind spreadsheets. Ledgers seized from the raids told a story of ruthless efficiency. Every employee was tagged with a number, every transaction coded as therapy, every payment split into micro deposits across multiple states. According to Reuters, and DW Homeland Security's Financial Crimes Division traced more than 200 shell accounts in the United States linked to fake wellness and consulting firms. These entities served as gateways routing money through small fintech platforms before disappearing into Hong Kong and Macau corporate registries. From there, profits were redistributed to offshore holding companies connected to Chinese organized crime. Federal officials said some transfers were so well disguised that they passed through legitimate US real estate escrow accounts, making detection nearly impossible without AI-assisted analytics. The pattern mirrors financial warfare seen elsewhere. During Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Western intelligence uncovered similar laundering systems used by oligarch networks to evade sanctions, fragmenting assets, rerouting cash through crypto channels, and reassembling them offshore. The trafficking network, now dismantled by the FBI and ICE, used nearly identical methods. The convergence of human trafficking and digital finance has blurred the line between organized crime and state-level strategy. This is not just Vice One federal analyst told The Guardian, it's economic infiltration. Under President Trump's renewed Homeland Security initiative, investigators began treating illicit finance like national defense. The Department of Justice established a joint analytical command combining IRS HSI and FBI cyber units. Their mission to trace every transaction, freeze every account, and identify every foreign nexus behind these funds. Early analysis revealed crypto wallets holding hundreds of thousands of dollars in USDT and Monero, anonymized and recycled through decentralized exchanges. The same financial corridors used to smuggle synthetic opioids into the US were now being used to launder profits from sexual exploitation. Experts from Defense News compared this to a new form of gray zone conflict, one where adversaries use civilian markets as battlefields. China's triads analysts say serve a dual function profit generation and geopolitical leverage. By embedding criminal networks within Western economies, they weaken trust, spread corruption, and undermine regulatory sovereignty. The technique is not unlike the hybrid warfare model Russia employs through private military contractors or Iran's use of proxy militias for deniable operations. This isn't coincidence, it's evolution. Global power now operates through covert economies that erode nations from within. Every dollar laundered through these massage parlors is a dollar reinforcing that system. It's the same concept NATO strategists call non-kinetic disruption, where financial, informational, and social tools replace traditional weapons. The trafficking network uncovered in America fits that doctrine perfectly. It generates money, manipulates immigration systems, and destabilizes law enforcement credibility. At home, the scale of corruption has reignited debate about domestic transparency. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are proposing stricter reporting for small cash businesses, while Treasury officials consider extending counterterrorism finance tools to cover human trafficking. Yet critics warn of overreach. Civil liberties advocates fear a future where every transaction is tracked in the name of protection, a digital panopticon justified by the specter of crime. Still few deny the urgency. Each figure in those seized ledgers represented a stolen life. The women forced into servitude weren't just numbers in a balance sheet, they were the cost of ignoring how crime evolves in the age of globalization. As Al Jazeera noted, the new slave ships are spreadsheets. And the question now facing the United States is hauntingly familiar. Can a democracy defend itself from invisible enemies without surrendering the freedoms that define it? The answer, like the money trail itself, may take years to uncover. The raid began before sunrise. Convoys of unmarked SUVs rolled through quiet neighborhoods, headlights off radios silent. At exactly 4:15 a.m., command posts from Texas to Missouri gave the order, execute. Within minutes, doors splintered open. Federal agents poured into buildings that looked like ordinary spas, pastel signs, floral curtains, and softly humming fountains. But inside, the air was thick with fear and disinfectant. Operation Coast to Coast unfolded like a precision strike. More than 150 agencies, including FBI, ICE, and Homeland Security's tactical response units, hit over 20 locations simultaneously. Each entry team moved with rehearsed synchronization. The objective: arrest the ringleaders before they could destroy evidence or vanish into digital anonymity. By the time the sun rose, 30 suspects were in federal custody, and over 60 women had been rescued, some too frightened to speak, others sobbing with disbelief that the nightmare was over. According to Reuters and BBC News, one of the rescued victims was just 14 years old, trafficked across multiple states using forged guardianship papers. She was found hidden behind a false wall in a Missouri spa. She hadn't seen daylight for weeks, one investigator told reporters. Her only view of the world was through a vent. The operation's scale stunned the nation. In Washington, President Trump praised the Joint Task Force as proof that America could still defend itself from criminal infiltration and moral decay. He emphasized that trafficking networks are not isolated crimes, but part of a broader assault on U.S. sovereignty. The administration's stance reflects an increasingly militarized approach to internal security, one shaped by lessons from global battlefields. The same coordination once used against insurgent cells in Afghanistan and Iraq was now being applied domestically to dismantle human trafficking rings. Analysts from Defense News and Jane's Defense Weekly have drawn parallels between this operation and multi-domain warfare strategies, where cyber, financial, and human intelligence intersect. In both, timing is everything. The synchronized nature of Operation Coast to Coast left traffickers no window to escape or alert offshore coordinators. Homeland Security sources later revealed that encrypted communications between the U.S. cells and Chinese handlers were intercepted hours before the raids, a breakthrough in real-time digital forensics. Yet the story didn't end with handcuffs. The aftermath exposed another side of the battle: compassion in the face of trauma. Within hours, temporary triage centers were set up in parking lots and community halls. Nonprofit partners like Freedom Network USA and Safe House Alliance mobilized medical teams and interpreters. Many of the rescued women were dehydrated, injured, or psychologically broken. They had been told that American police would deport them or harm them. Instead, agents offered blankets, water, and words of safety. This humanitarian phase, largely overlooked in headlines, represents the moral pivot of the mission. Federal officials wanted to prove that enforcement could coexist with empathy, that the US could dismantle exploitation without replicating its cruelty. Trauma specialists compared the conditions found in the parlors to industrialized servitude. Some women hadn't left their buildings in over a year. They lived on instant noodles, slept on towels, and feared every footstep outside their rooms. Globally, the shockwaves were immediate. Human rights groups in Europe and Asia praised the operation as a blueprint for coordinated intervention. DW reported that Germany and France are now considering joint operations targeting similar trafficking corridors connected to Eastern Europe and the Balkans. In the Middle East, Al Jazeera drew comparisons to recent UN findings on trafficking routes tied to Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, another reminder that exploitation knows no borders. But behind the tactical success lies a haunting question: can this victory endure? Federal analysts admit that for every parlor shut down, 2 more could reopen under new names. The Hydra effect, they call it. The war against human trafficking may have won a major battle, but the system feeding it global inequality, digital anonymity, and demand still thrives. And so as night falls again over America's cities, another question lingers. How do you fight monsters that hide in the ordinary and ensure that in saving others, the nation doesn't lose its own humanity? By dawn the next day, the raids had ended, but the real investigation was only beginning. Dozens of computers, encrypted phones, and handwritten ledgers were stacked on long tables at the Federal Command Center. The air buzzed with the hum of servers as analysts from the FBI, IRS, and Homeland Security began the painstaking process of decoding the trafficking network's digital skeleton. Each file, each message, each transaction was a thread in a vast web stretching across continents. Reuters reported that forensic specialists uncovered tens of thousands of chat logs detailing payments, client rosters, and coded transfers between US-based facilitators and overseas handlers in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. Some messages used emojis as transaction signals. A rose for a payment cleared a wave for a victim moved. Beneath their banality lay the coordination of modern slavery. One Homeland Security official called it organized crime in the language of convenience. The Department of Justice quickly formed a joint analytical task force, a fusion cell, designed to track every cent of profit and every foreign link. Investigators traced wire transfers disguised as real estate fees through shell firms registered in Nevada, Hong Kong, and the Cayman Islands. Cryptocurrency wallets revealed microtransactions in stablecoins such as USDT and Monero structured to bypass banking scrutiny. According to BBC News, several of those wallets shared metadata with accounts tied to known Chinese triad groups already sanctioned for fentanyl trafficking. For the Trump administration, the discovery offered both outrage and opportunity. The White House ordered a full review of foreign shell company regulations and directed the Treasury Department to expand the use of RICO and transnational crime sanctions tools, once reserved for drug cartels and terror financiers. If money laundering is their weapon, one senior DHS advisor told The Guardian financial exposure will be ours. The new approach treats trafficking as a hybrid threat where economic, digital, and human exploitation converge into one adversarial front. The implications extend beyond the criminal. Lawmakers are debating new federal licensing laws for massage and spa businesses, including random inspections and financial transparency mandates. Civil liberties advocates warn against overreach, arguing that constant surveillance risks punishing legitimate immigrant-owned businesses. But supporters insist that without stronger oversight, trafficking networks will continue to flourish in plain sight. Globally, intelligence sharing has accelerated. DW confirmed that Germany's Bundeskriminalamt and Europol have joined data exchanges with US agencies targeting parallel trafficking operations across Europe. Interpol's Beijing office is reportedly assisting in tracking the overseas ringleaders, though analysts question how far cooperation with Chinese law enforcement can truly go, given allegations that some of these syndicates operate under the blind eye of regional officials. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera drew stark comparisons between America's operation and anti-slavery crackdowns in the Middle East, where militias and private contractors exploit migrant workers in war zones. The similarity is chilling different continents' same system of human commodification. In Ukraine, displaced women from frontline zones face recruitment into illicit labor markets. In Iran, state-linked groups profit from coerced migration through proxy networks. The same shadow economy that the US dismantled domestically thrives abroad under different flags. Back home, communities near the raided businesses are still processing the revelations. In Franklin, Alabama, residents told The Guardian they had long suspected something wasn't right, but no one imagined the scale. Local police departments have begun requesting federal training on recognizing trafficking fronts, how to distinguish a real wellness center from one hiding servitude behind smiles and soft music. The aftermath has also sparked a rare bipartisan push in Congress. New bills propose mandatory trafficking awareness programs for municipal inspectors, stricter visa screening, and expanded funding for survivor rehabilitation. Yet critics question whether legislation alone can address the deeper cause, the demand that sustains the market. Each discovery in the forensic lab tells a sobering truth. While law enforcement dismantles networks, global systems of inequality keep building new ones. One DHS analyst put it bluntly, you can shut down the parlor, but unless you shut down the pipeline, the money, the demand, the apathy, another will rise. The question now haunting Washington isn't just how to stop trafficking, it's whether America, in fighting this invisible war, can preserve the ideals that make its justice worth defending. Freedom was supposed to be America's birthright, but what Operation Coast to Coast revealed is that even within the nation's borders, that promise can be quietly stolen. The aftermath of the raids has forced the country to confront a sobering paradox. The same openness that defines democracy can also conceal its deepest shadows. As the dust settles, federal officials call this the beginning of a long-term campaign, a moral and strategic battle to reclaim American soil from the silent machinery of human exploitation. Homeland Security has pledged to expand its trafficking intelligence network, while the Trump administration has announced new funding for survivor rehabilitation and international cooperation against transnational crime. We will treat traffickers as the enemy within, one senior White House advisor told Reuters. They infiltrate our economy, our communities, and our conscience. But beneath the rhetoric lies a larger question, one that cuts to the heart of global power. The methods used to dismantle trafficking rings in America now mirror the same hybrid doctrines shaping warfare worldwide. Intelligence fusion, cross-agency coordination, and real-time digital tracing. These are the same strategies NATO employs against Russian cyber units in Ukraine and Iranian proxy networks across the Middle East. The line between defense and domestic security has never been thinner. Experts at Jane's Defense Weekly warn that as governments strengthen surveillance and coordination, the risk of moral drift grows. The tools used to fight organized crime, they note, can just as easily be turned inward. It's a dilemma nations from Israel to Germany are already facing, how to protect freedom without policing it out of existence. In China, authorities claim their own anti-trafficking operations, yet those same systems often overlap with state repression. The irony is stark. The free world must now use the precision of authoritarian systems to defend human liberty. Globally, the crackdown has set a precedent. DW reports that European Union security ministers are studying the US model as a framework for multinational operations. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera highlights that Southeast Asian governments are quietly preparing joint task forces to counter similar trafficking channels tied to Chinese syndicates. The United Nations has praised the raids as a landmark in cross-border coordination, but cautions that the battle is far from over. Traffickers evolve faster than laws. For the survivors, freedom is not a press release. It's a fragile new beginning. Many remain in protective shelters, learning English, rebuilding trust, and trying to believe that the system that once failed them will now protect them. Social workers describe their recovery as a slow return from invisibility. They lived for years in silence, said one advocate from Freedom Network USA. Now they must learn to speak again. In a broader sense, their voices echo the same struggle facing the world, the fight to remain human in an age of exploitation and automation. As the US rebuilds its defenses, digital, moral, and political, its challenge is not only to destroy the machinery of trafficking, but to ensure that in doing so, it does not become mechanical itself. The story of Operation Coast to Coast is no longer just about massage parlors. It's about sovereignty, morality, and the price of vigilance in an era where even compassion must be armed. As one federal commander said during a briefing in Washington, we are not just dismantling networks, we are defining what freedom still means. And so the question that remains echoing across borders and time zones is this: if freedom must now be defended like a fortress, how long before it begins to feel like one? Operation Coast to Coast exposed one of the most extensive human trafficking networks ever uncovered in the United States, a sprawling system of Chinese-run massage parlors stretching across 5 states. The raids, coordinated by the FBI, ICE, and Homeland Security, freed over 60 victims and resulted in 30 arrests. Evidence linked the network to Chinese triads laundering millions through shell companies and digital currencies. Under President Trump, trafficking has been elevated to a national security priority, with new financial and legislative tools deployed to dismantle such syndicates. Analysts draw global parallels to hybrid warfare tactics, where crime, cyber systems, and geopolitics intertwine. Yet beyond the strategy lies a moral reckoning. How can democracies protect the vulnerable without eroding the freedoms they stand for? The survivors' rescue is a victory, but their silence lingers as a reminder that the war against modern slavery is not just fought with weapons or warrants, but with conscience.